All right, so I'm going to quickly go over the agenda. We'll have time for public comment, review our minutes. We have two primary topics for the meeting today: to reacquaint ourselves with our project to update our zoning primarily for village center zoning through a bylaw modernization grant the town received about a year ago. And we will revisit that project and make some plans for making progress on it. And then Chris Shaheen has prepared for us a 2025 work plan, which we talked briefly about at a previous meeting that it was in the works. And so we're interested to see what people have to say about that, what's missing, timelines, things that people are interested to work on. Then we will share some updates and goings on around town with our work with other committees, and Chris will let us know what he's been up to. Any other business, and wrapping up and planning for our next meeting on February 18th. Sound like a plan? Any changes needed for the agenda? Okay. Moving on to public comment. Does anyone have any comment that they wish to share with the Planning Commission? And I would just remind you that we will have time for public comment during the specific topics. So if you have something to share with the Planning Commission that's not on the agenda, that would be the most helpful way of using the time. And if you would keep your comments to 3 minutes or less. Does anybody have any comments for the Planning Commission? And if you're on the Zoom, you can either unmute and chime in since there's not that many people here, or use the raise hand feature. Okay, so hearing none, then we'll move on to approve our minutes. So I will entertain a motion to approve the minutes of January 21st.
Motion to approve.
Wendy made the motion to approve, and I'll say, Eric, are you seconding it? Seconding it? Does anybody have any corrections or clarifications for the minutes? Okay, so we'll vote to approve the minutes. All those in favor of approving the minutes of January 21st say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any abstentions? Chris abstained. Any noes? Okay, thank you. Okay, next we're on to topic number 5, which is a discussion. We're not making any decisions tonight. We are going to hear from Chris about the status of the project. He's been working quite a bit offline with David White over the last several weeks, and I will pass it to him.
Great. I don't know, Sabrina, if you can pull
I have to stop the share for a second. Something is malfunctioning. 1 minute. Okay, now I can manipulate it.
Great. Okay, so for the bylaw modernization grant, I'm just going to call it Simplify and Streamline, because that's what we're working on, and I think that's a good name for that. So if you want to go to the next slide. So this is the timeline for getting the project done by June. So if you remember, we amended David's contract to extend it through the end of June. So that is kind of our drop dead time for when we have to get the work done. There are 3 lines on this timeline. There's the project team, that's me and David. I guess I'll also include Susan, because we check in with Susan and make sure we're on track and get her feedback before we move on to some things. Then there's the Planning Commission. You can see where we are now. That's just the beginning of February. And then the 3rd line is the Select Board, which just ends with their hearing. So the big pieces of this are, so right now, David and I have gone through and we've responded to all of the comments that we received from the Planning Commission before December. This document is going to be sent out to all of the Planning Commission members for you to take a look at tomorrow. I'm going to talk about that more in a second. So between now and the end of April, we're going to work through some issues that myself, Chris Flynn, and David identified that need further Planning Commission discussion. We've also built some time into our timeline to discuss additional issues that planning commission members might identify after going through all of the comments. We will likely need a working group to work through some of the comments on Chapter 13 for the character-based zone. So think about if you want to be on that working group, and I'm looking at Chris Brown because I'm hoping that you're just going to be on that working group. Then we'll have a planning commission hearing in May, and then the select board meeting in June. So if you want to go to the next slide. Okay, so in terms of what the outstanding issues are that we have identified, there's a question about whether or not the zoning administrator is delegated review of minor site plan and minor subdivisions, and if so, what the criteria are. So we'll bring that back to the planning commission for more discussion. For the character-based zone, there are a lot of comments on the character-based zone, so we want to bring that back. See if the changes that we've made have gone far enough to simplify them, and talk about that a little bit more. So that's a second topic. Another one is if there are any standards that we think that should be applied to the village center zones. The reason why we want to look at that is because we are proposing to eliminate all density caps and minimum lot sizes in those zones. So do we want there to be some other standards that we are applying? What might those be?
Yeah, can I just ask a question? So the what we're going to get tomorrow, that's, you and David have been working to sift through all those comments and make some sense of them and make some decisions about how to move forward with them. So what we are going to get back for relative, for example, all of these topics is not something we've necessarily seen before. Would it be something, a new version based on our comments?
I can't remember what got sent out for the comments before. So there was a table that had a heading of like what the code was, what the heading of that was, and then there was a column where everyone could put their comments in. So there's now a third column that is just David's comments in response to the planning commission members. And then some of them are my comments and some of them are Chris Flynn's comments. So the question is going to be, has what David said in response to your comments satisfied your comment? Or is it something that needs to be further discussed?
Okay, so what we're going to get tomorrow is that table. It's not a draft of the final.
I am working with David on getting an updated red line to also send out.
Okay, okay.
So I want that to go out tomorrow too, but I don't have it yet.
But to one step further, Chris and David know that what is in that table and what is in that red line is still unanswered about these particular topics. So the comments and the table is like, sort of like everything else that they think they've addressed or that they think they've resolved, but they know for a fact that these have not been addressed and have not been resolved. And so our job is to look at what they've resolved and determine if we're cool with it or if it needs to be added to this list. And this list is our work list of the things that we as a group need to deliberate and discuss and trade ideas about to provide further direction to David. Because he already knows, like, the comments are not clear enough, or we didn't have consensus, or we were like, oh yeah, we need to talk about that, but then we never really did.
Is he going to include in that his recommendations as an answer to the comment, or just, here's an unresolved comment, what do you want me to do about it?
Both. Right.
So some will be, I don't know what to do about it, tell me. Others will be, I think this is the answer.
Correct. So one of the, just one that I can remember, I think it might have been Sabina, or someone said something about providing, like requiring underground parking, or something about underground parking. Someone made a comment about that, and David's response is, underground parking is not practical for the scale of buildings that we were talking about in Riverside. So that would be a response to a particular comment. Another comment, I think this one came from Chris Flynn. Chris Flynn is not comfortable. He doesn't want, he's not comfortable with some of the authority that is being given to him or being recommended being given to the zoning administrator. So that's like the first one, the review of minor site plans and manipulation to the ZA. That, something like that is something that is specific in the Enabling Better Places guide as something to do, like give more authority to the zoning administrator to take care of the simpler things. Because there's sort of a policy difference within staff, like we need to then go to the planning commission and say, okay, this is a policy issue. Do we want to do this? We will meet with Chris Flynn, see if there are criteria or something else that can get added, and then so like that's just something that's a higher level discussion that we need direction on from the planning commission.
But so where you see like a topic with a date, so Eric, like what you're describing, what we talked about is that Chris and David would come to that meeting on March 18th with, here's what best practices are, here's what we said before, here's why you said you were uncomfortable. So it's not just gonna be a free-for-all, it will benefit from a much more structured discussion. And we'll have an opportunity to hear what their recommendations are. And in other cases, they might not have a recommendation. It might be clearly like a judgment call on our part. And so that's one reason why it seems like really, does it really take 7 meetings to get through, 7 issues? That seems, but when you really think about it, each of these issues is pretty meaty, and we do want to hear, and they need time to do the research, to come to the meeting, and we need time to read whatever they assign us to read in advance of the meeting so we come to it well-informed.
So in terms of, Susan pointed out there's a date column on the far right. One of those dates is April 29th. That is a 5th Tuesday. There's not a planning commission meeting scheduled. I'm asking that you put a hold on that in case we need an additional planning commission to get through some things. The other thing that's good is that we have till the end of June. I don't want the schedule to slip, but if something happens, we have a little wiggle room in here. If there are a lot of unresolved issues that the Planning Commission identifies that need to be further discussed, we're going to have to figure out how to get that done, whether it's one-on-one discussions, working groups, or whether it's included on agenda in one of these open Planning Commission schedules. So we need to think through that after we get some feedback from you guys. Do you want to say anything more? No.
Chris has done an amazing job. He went through and read all the minutes of all the meetings that we had before he came, where we talked about this grant and all these issues. And so compiling all of that input into something much more usable, I think, it's taken a while to get here. I think we talked about this a little while back, like we had to kind of restart, but I think that now this, it will be greased to get through it a lot more quickly because it'll be a lot more structured. So thank you for doing all that work.
Thank you. That's at least the plan to get, okay. Any more questions on the schedule? All right, let's go to the next slide. Okay, so this is next steps for everyone. It says review, so for each planning commission member, you're going to get this list tomorrow. I know it says review 30 plus pages, it's actually 40. So it's 40 pages of planning commission comments with responses. You can see on the left, that's what you're going to see. It's the documents with 3 columns on it. You'll have to go through, identify issues that you think need more discussion. If you have a comment that wasn't specifically resolved. You will see in the table, my comments are going to be in blue. Chris Flynn's comments are in red. Planning Commission members' comments are in black. And where we know who provided the comment, your initials are after them. So we got a little better at getting the comments as the batches went out. So the first batch has the least tracking, but then the future ones we have a little more better idea of who said what. I will also be sending you I will just call it like a worksheet for you to put in your comments. So that is a table with 3 columns. There are instructions on it so you know what to do. The first column is the number of the code, so 10.10.3. The second one is what's the issue that's not resolved, and then the third issue is like what's the question that needs to be answered.
So we're not mucking around with it,
Right.
Correct.
messing it up.
Correct.
We're not allowed to mess it up.
Correct.
There's also a little, we also have a little higher hurdle to say it's still an issue. So
So
there's a little built-in incentive to be like, it's fine.
that higher hurdle is that we want to know everything that you think is unresolved, but you need to give us your top 3.
Out of 30 pages?
40.
40.
Yeah.
Yeah, but you have to assume 80% of them are gonna be fine.
And the reason why I want to get all of your issues is because if 3 or 4 people have as the 4th or 5th or 6th issue, and it's the same, then I want to bump that up and get it resolved.
So can it be like general categories, like too much focus on aesthetics or subjective codes rather than like the individual 10.3, 0.1, 0.2, you know what I mean? Like so there's thematics because we bumped up against some.
I would ask that you be as specific as you can, and if as specific as you can is this section. So, I mean, it breaks down a lot. I mean, it's 10.10, but then there's 10.10.1, or it's 10.10.1.3. And if you're saying it's 10.10,
Mhm.
that's better than saying 10.
Okay.
Yeah, so
That's
just
fair.
try to be as specific as you can, keeping in mind, we only have so much time between now and the end of, it's really like beginning into the middle of May to work through everything. So the deadline can help us prioritize. And then, your feedback will help guide additional discussion that's needed.
So you want the responses from us on the 12th?
Yes,
Okay.
That's a week.
it's,
And that's fine, I'm just putting it like if it's not a, thank you for the exact date, Chris, it's super helpful.
yeah, I think it's 10 days.
That's fine.
Yeah,
Well,
I'm not arguing about the amount of time, it's just kind of make sure that
plus or minus.
I am not good at math, but now that you say that, 7 plus 5 is 12. So yes, it's 7 days. But it includes a weekend. So that's probably not even, that's probably worse. That's probably worse.
Theoretically, we've seen it all before, at least twice.
Yeah, and theoretically, you should be going right to where your comments are and seeing if they've been addressed. So it's not like you really need to read every word.
What you're asking is to read this. If you can also send us David's updated draft, that would be a separate.
Yeah, I want to get it to you as soon as I can. We just need to work with what we've got now.
Yeah.
Right. But isn't it true there's gonna be a lot of things in the chart where where it's like, this is a typo. And he's like, fine, I'll fix the typo, but it might not be in the red line yet.
Right, well, there are a number of things where he's saying, done, accepted, yes, made the change.
Yep.
And then there are other ones where he's like, underground parking is that practical in Jericho, or like that. So, and then there are other ones where he said this requires more discussion from the planning commission, and that's what's on the previous slide. There are a lot of comments that are not fully resolved for chapter 13. I think that's getting to your comment, Wendy. You had a lot of comments on chapter 13. So that's one where David and I still need to do a little more work. I have some ideas on how to streamline those regs a little bit. That's the one where we're going to need, I think, a working group to work through some things so that when it comes back to the planning commission, it's not kind of a free-for-all. It's like, okay, we've worked through some of these issues. These are the recommendations that we have moving forward.
Fun.
Any other questions? speaking of fun,
Okay, actually, wait 1 second. So,
Love the photo.
so that was the bylaw modernization grant. I just want to make sure, does any planning commission people have any further questions on that? And then I wanted to
Oh,
make
public
sure we had
comment,
the
yeah.
opportunity for public comment on that. No. So Jim or Michael, and I don't know if anybody else has joined.
No, as far
Okay.
as I know, just, well, Bill and Michael.
I didn't see Bill up there, but
He's up
okay.
there.
He's
Yeah.
up there, okay.
Well,
So
I'm
does
here.
anybody have any, what we just discussed, how we're going to approach the grant and our, just looking forward that our meetings, February, March, April, will be back at it, heavy hitting on zoning changes, potential zoning changes.
I would like-
Okay,
I would
go
like to-
ahead.
Yeah, thank you. I'd like to make a comment about what it was said about David, saying that underground parking is not applicable to the size of the buildings in Riverside. Did I hear that correctly?
yes.
I don't understand that. I mean, we've been explaining from the beginning, 5 years ago, that we want underground parking for our building. So this suggests two things. One, we can't have underground building parking, and two, we're not going to be able to build the building we want. Or anything of any substance. I find that very disturbing.
Sorry. I'm sorry, didn't mean to cut you off, Bill. I'd have to go back
That's
and look
all
at the
right.
comment. But I think the comment might have been like requiring underground parking. And
Oh, I see.
the regulation wouldn't say you can't have underground parking. It's just saying, underground parking isn't practical for the size and scale of most of the buildings, or all of the buildings are going to be built in Riverside, depending on, what they are.
Well,
So
but
if
that's also concerning, because it suggests that you're not going to let us build the main, a main building, that would have underground parking, because, I mean, one is leading to the other, as far as my understanding of the statement.
Chris, isn't he saying underground parking is not practical to be required, but could be optional?
Yes.
Right, but also, will we be able to build a building of substance enough to make it appropriate for underground parking?
So there are maximum building sizes in the zoning that are not proposed to be changed.
So 100-foot long building is not going to be acceptable.
I'd have to look at the regs to see specifically about what that was, but I think the width was, I think there's a width limit of, is it 60 or something? And then the depth, I don't think there's a limit on the depth, but I'd have to go back and look at the regs to be specific, no, for sure.
I mean, this is a
This is an
pretty,
issue I know this is an issue and a concern that you have, Bill.
yeah, good. It's a really big deal. We want to make a center, not just for our people, but for the town. You have to have some substance there, as far as the building footprint. And having the underground parking is essential for elderly people so they don't fall down in the ice.
Yeah, I think this
So
is
do I.
something, Bill, that you and I can have a more detailed conversation about
Okay.
outside of the commission meeting if you want to, yeah.
Yeah, this is a really big part of this for us. So yes, I would look forward to that. And thank you, everybody, for your interest in the project, but I hope you see how this blocks it, or potentially blocks it.
Okay, any other comments on the plan?
On that
Jim?
same thing, and since Chris is new, I've had a major concern with this project scope from the very beginning. The center of Jericho, the area that is most developable, that has the most infrastructure, and is the most practical to be built on, is not included in the scope of this project, and that is the commercial zone. And it's like, frankly, there aren't any defined areas within Jericho on its zoning map that makes much sense. So going through all of this word smithing when we're missing the major key issues, which are, what are the areas? So the center of Jericho is quite practically the area where you could actually develop and do something significant without trying to get $10 million for sewage. Jericho Center, as it's defined now, is essentially undevelopable. There's not good soils. All of the existing septic systems are within the plume of the wells, and vice versa. And so we go through this all the time like we're really accomplishing something, when in fact, because we haven't fixed the zoning map, we don't have an infrastructure plan, and we've ignored, and frankly, after 47 years here, I think it has a lot more to do with who owns the land that could possibly be better zoned than the practical limitations of it. Because when you look at the commercial zone, you've got intensive highway connections, you've got water, you've got favorable topography, you've got all types of advantages. So because somebody wanted to do the sawmill, they ignored the commercial zone. You guys worked on the commercial zone, we didn't like the direction you were going in, so we asked you to stop, have a meeting with the select board. That's almost 3 years ago. We still have not had the meeting. So as you move towards June, as you go through all of this, a couple minor adjustments in the scope and the approach that you take could cause this to be a really significant long-term strategic advantage. And some of the things that Bill's talking about, there never was a lot of applied logic to the sawmill development form-based code. I don't think its initial core was actually done by the Planning Commission. I believe it was done at the behest of the Select Board by an outside. So a lot of these things, like Tetro wanted to build a restaurant there, and because of the same issues that Bill's talking about, after he dropped 100 large doing all the planning, found out that he was tripping over one of these absolute unavoidable issues of width and length of a lot. Why should we even have a lot? That ownership of a lot, ownership of the property is not a zoning issue. It's between the people who live there. And so there's all types of great opportunities to rethink as you go through this. Are we going down the right road? Why are we putting limitations on width and length of a lot? Because somebody at the onset of this project decided what would look the way they want it to look. That's not how you develop property. That's how you develop an individual development. So I think that look at the zoning maps. Why is just this section included, and why isn't the commercial section included?
Okay, that's a good segue because we're going to talk a little bit about the map
One last comment.
in our next
Public
segment.
safety and infrastructure, Susan, and I don't mean to be rude, but we've got these $10, $14 million projects. There's no reason to not have small-scale municipal infrastructure, whether it's water or sewer. We're going to get farther and better not doing the major scale projects. And if you go to Morgan Road and you look at the Senesac project that's just been done there, you have 9 large homes with a single septic system. There's no reason that can't be managed by a municipal control point, and that gets us exempt from Act 250. The reason why that project doesn't have 20 houses is because if they went over 9, they'd have triggered Act 250. Act 250 is 1,800 to 24 months, and it's another $150,000. So there's exemptions to Act 250 if, in fact, the municipality has the governance and the control over the septic system. Doesn't make any difference how it's built or who built it, because that's all controlled by A&R anyway.
Okay, thank you. Okay, anything else on the bylaw modernization grant? Thank you very much. Okay, so speaking of the map, the next topic, number 6, is about projects that the Planning Commission will be working on in 2025, in addition to this thing, because we're going to try to walk and talk and chew gum at the same time, I guess is the expression. So once again,
Can I just give a little
Yes.
shout out to the town plans that all the people are holding in their hands? Like that is so awesome.
oh, in the graphic,
That's
yes,
some
yes.
bad Photoshop skills.
So I thought the work plan would be a little dry, so I wanted to, have a little fun,
I
so,
really
yeah.
appreciate that.
Cool. Thank you for recognizing that. Okay, so here is our work plan for 2025, and a lot of this was set or put in place when I got here. So this is sort of like reflecting, what's on our work plan. So I'll just kind of go down the list here. You can kind of see, so the blue is active projects that are coming to the Planning Commission as discussion. The green is pre-planning, so it's work that I'm doing with either CC or CP or CC or DC. It's maybe work that I'm doing with the Conservation Commission or working with other staff people to queue up a project, and then the purple stars are Planning Commission hearings and the red are Select Board hearings on bylaw modernization, or they need to take a position, we need to take a position on something. Okay, so the first one, the residential density, our hearing scheduled for February and then Select Board in March, so that one's going to be done fairly soon. Next is the bylaw modernization grant. You can see on our timeline, we don't have a lot of time to get through a lot of stuff. Hopefully that'll be done. It's got to be done by June. Future land use map updates. So that's what we got the presentation on from CCRPC last meeting. We also have a fairly short time to get some things done for that. I've worked with Darren at CCRPC to figure out what the right dates are for that and when it's coming to the Planning Commission. For the natural resource overlay forest blocks, that's something that the Conservation Commission got some funding to do some forest block mapping. We put in a proposal to CCRPC as a UPWP project. We'll also be applying for a municipal planning grant to help us get some of that work done. That will probably take us all the way through at least to November. December may go longer than that. That's sort of a placeholder when we get into the quarter 4. Enable housing, the next one. This is a list of recommendations that the Affordable Housing Committee forwarded onto the Select Board. The Select Board has taken those, said these are the ones that we want the Planning Commission to work on. So I'll be sort of queuing up what that work is going to be. We'll get into that as soon as the bylaw modernization grant is done. The one after that is town plan cracking. That is not something that at least I've had any discussions with. But Susan, I think you said it has come up before with talking with other planning commission members. So the town plan has a specific item about figuring out how to track projects that are in the town plan, and that's a responsibility of the planning commission, so that's another thing. And hopefully we can get that done sooner rather than later, which is why I have it kind of wrapping up in quarter 2.
Well, can I just say one thing about that? In my mind, that is an ongoing, twice a year, I don't know how many times a year, but we check in. It's a self-check to say, what were our goals? What have we gotten done?
Totally.
So it's not a done for.
Totally.
Okay.
Yeah. So what is on the work plan is figuring out what the methodology is and what the process is for when we check in. What are we looking at? How are we going through that process? And we should coordinate with Paula on that and make sure we're doing everything in a certain way that's consistent for everyone. So I'm sorry, it's a very good point, and that's what is on the calendar. All right, so those are sort of specific planning commission projects. Other things I've just listed up here for special projects. So there's a wastewater public education grant, which we have through the Leahy Institute. I'm doing some pre-work on that. I'll tell you a little more about what's going on with that in the town planner report. Susan and I have talked about getting ahead of the FY27 capital budget. So we'll be thinking about that for the first and second quarter, and then maybe get into some work on the quarter 3, quarter 4 on that. Riverside wastewater, that's just sort of an ongoing thing. I'm doing a lot of work on that. We'll be having periodic check-ins with the Planning Commission on that. 2 other things I have on here. Official map, I have this listed because it is in the town plan as something that would be done in the first year. I think there's a lot more pre-work that has to be done before we know exactly what it is that we want to put on the official map. And it may involve working with it will involve working with other committees and other entities in the region, possibly. So I just kind of have that on there now as we're still doing like a lot of project prep for that. And then as the next one, Assess Act 47 and Act 51, we'll just be doing an ongoing review of legislation from the state and when we might be able to update zoning or other regulations when we can to come in compliance with new regulations that the state is coming out. So that's what we've got for 2025. I'm not sure what the next slide is. Okay, go back, please. Great, okay. Any comments on this?
I have a question. Do we have, I feel like, and I'm unfortunately I don't have an example to give, but I feel like throughout the year we come across these little zoning issues and we think, oh, we should remember that and address that when we have a minute. Do we have, or if we don't, could we have a running list of those so that we could intersperse them into our bigger projects?
I think definitely yes, we should have a running list. I think figuring out when to queue them up to bring them into the Planning Commission. I think yes, we should when we've got the capacity. So another thing that Susan and I have been working on is what's like agenda planning for the Planning Commission. So we've got every Planning Commission for the rest of the year figuring out what are we going to be talking about at each Planning Commission meeting. Right now, a lot of the year is empty because it's sort of an iterative thing as we go along. So I think there is the opportunity to do what you are suggesting.
I just think if I were to be self-critical of the Planning Commission, I would say that would be one thing, is we get, sort of our head in the sand about a big project and 6 months disappears or 9 months or whatever. And so where possible, if we can bite off some of these smaller things along the way, I think that would be great.
The answer is yeah, we can try to figure out how to do that. Yeah, definitely we'll start tracking them if we haven't already.
That kind of brings up for me, Chris, some of these things that we've, you all before I joined have come across that are not particular to the village center and that we have wanted to kind of address and move forward on. But because the BLM is really focused on the village center, they've kind of been set to the side. I think a lot of the things that I'm particularly thinking of, not surprising, will probably be covered by Enable Housing, but I'm wondering if that's how you all are thinking about that as well. Some of the things that in your review of the regs that you've been doing for the bylaw modernization that are not village center specific that you've set to the side. I think are maybe some of the kinds of things you're thinking about, Chris, and so do those come into play on this timeline, or how are you thinking about moving forward on those things?
So for example, SJ, like we had this discussion about allowing fourplexes in all districts, right? And that was something that the Affordable Housing Commission was interested in, but we're like, all right, let's table that because that's beyond the scope of the grant and we want to do additional research.
Yeah.
So that would be an example of what might have come up in Enable Housing. Is that?
Yes, and
okay.
So I can think of a bunch of housing specific examples, but I'm thinking about, I'm just kind of playing off, Chris, what you're saying, if there are some non-housing recommendations that maybe would fall under that category or not, I don't know.
I'm sure there are. I'm not able to call to mind any of those things.
No, and it's more of just a like,
can
can that be part of the consideration?
Right.
Is, figure, designating a parking lot, identifying what those things are, and if we have a plan to potentially propose a package of changes, then maybe consistently checking into that parking lot and saying, do these things make sense to include?
So I do have a parking lot list somewhere in the bowels of my computer that got started with Catherine Sonic. And then I reviewed it when Linda came on board, but we haven't really gone over it. And so that would probably be a good place to start, and then we can add to it as we bring stuff along. I think it's always an important question to ask about scope, because like I look at this and I think like, oh my God, all these public hearings, and I think about the public and being transparent and fair, and they can, you know, people aren't really paying attention, and making sure that they're quite well aware of what we're working on without having sort of a laundry list of stuff together that seems very unrelated. So I think it's always going to be a little bit of a judgment call on our part about what to roll together and what not to roll together. So like I look at this list and I think like, well, even in a bigger picture, could we combine like the each of these projects has a primary deliverable or a primary outcome. So the future land use map update, the primary outcome will be the Regional Planning Commission will have a regional map that will be approved by the state, and that will designate certain areas in Jericho as qualifying for certain exemptions, which may not map exactly to our current zoning map. But so is there a deliverable in there that says, should we be updating our zoning map as part of that project? Or is the regional map, you know, good enough because it's going to rule? But then I also look at the next one, the NRO. The deliverable of that is an updated natural resources overlay map, and probably updated standards in the zoning regulations. And I think about enable housing is probably sort of like two bookends, and I'm not sure we shouldn't, since those hearing dates are so close together and their finished updates are kind, you know, and then also this is just sort of like throwing it out there. Does it make more sense to combine those two things together, because they're basically both getting at smart growth? This is where we want the growth, this is where we want the conservation, these are standards to enable growth, these are standards to enable conservation. And is that something that we'd feel good about helping the public kind of process at the same time? And for our sanity's sake, does it make sense to try to do them together? Not exactly answering your question about like the laundry list of stuff, but looking at the laundry list of stuff, there's probably things in there that could fall logically into those buckets so that we can pick them off when it logically makes sense. And then other times we might just have to have like a random, you know, laundry day kind of set of changes.
Maybe that's sort of the direction that from my perspective, might be the better one, is to say once a quarter, the list that Chris has, that SJ has, that we all have, put them down and say tick, 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 yes, no, yes, no, yes, no, and then decide what are we going to do about it.
So that is a great segue to another point I want to make, which is this is our 2025 work plan. We need to be thinking about our 2026 work plan. We've been talking about wanting to have quarterly meetings with the select board. So I've talked to Paul about this. We're working on getting that scheduled, and what we want. So Susan and I talked what we want to be a focus of that first meeting is what is our 2026 work plan. You know, what projects are a priority for them, what projects are a priority for us, and how to figure out when we're going to get that done.
So we could present the laundry list at that point to the select board as well, and then say, we've looked at these 15, 23, whatever it is, we think these are important. You guys do too? Let's work on it.
Yeah, so ideally, we'll have an idea of what our priorities are, and ideally by then, I'll have something from the select board also, so that we can have something to talk from when we get into that meeting, so we're not gonna be starting from scratch, they'll have something to react to.
So when do we start this?
Well, we're talking about it now. Yes, we need to think a bit about how to gather the information from the planning commission in terms of what the priority projects are to look at for 2020.
2026. Well, so I guess, sure. I guess I have a couple of questions about this list. One, is there anything missing big from this list? Two, assuming, we monkey with the dates and everything, do you feel like, you're committed to work on this, these are the right things? A lot of this is driven by the town plan. We're basically obligated to work on them. Chris organized it in a logical fashion. So if this is kind of like our working plan for 2025, then we could go back to the town plan and also extend these things and say, okay, therefore 2026. And I would like to go to that meeting with the select board and say, here's what we're working on. Do you agree with what's missing? Are there things on here that you would change the priorities for that you want to have done sooner, so that we're sort of giving ourselves our marching orders and we're confirming from them in a formal way that they in fact support what we're working on. And I think the other topic that we would talk to them about at the first meeting specifically is the capital budget, and starting to get their awareness about the work that has to be done on the staff part and finance and outside trainings that we might want to pursue. We can't wait. I think we know now that we have to start working on that at least in the summer.
So the future land use map work, starting again. There's not on our workload right now a thought of rethinking about the zoning map. That's not what the future land use map work is.
The future land use map is being driven by the state legislature saying, okay, all of the future land use maps in the state for all of the regional planning commissions need to use the same terminology. That's one of the big things that CCRPC is taking that list and applying it to the current regional land use map. So as part of that, they're checking in with the local planning commissions and the local select board to say, this is what we come up with, does this look right, getting feedback and then going through that. So that's one component of what they're going to be doing. They're also going to be developing housing targets for the region, so that's going to be folded into this discussion. I think there was a third thing, but I can't remember what it was. But those are two things that are going to be part of that discussion. I think where you're going is that may lead to changes that we want to make in our zoning map, and we're not factoring that into it.
Or we may want to make changes in our zoning map today, regardless of what they say. And
yeah, I kind of wish that the time, it's not up to us, but I wish that the timing here was a little bit flipped so that we could have done the work with the NRO and thinking through some of these questions about housing and being really, really informed on where are the areas that we really want to conserve, where are the natural resources, or areas that Jim has suggested of these soils are fantastic, let's really prioritize that, let's think about where our greatest potential for growth is, and have those kind of informed discussions that I think we'll be having before we had to go do this map with CCRPC.
But that, I guess as I'm thinking of it and understanding it, they are separate. They can be separate.
They are 100%
So it
separate.
doesn't.
But I'm bummed to not have done that homework before going in and advocating for these boundaries or this potential growth center or this whatever.
I think we'll be in really good shape. because the mapping work is already done for the Conservation Commission, so it's available to us during the future land use map update. And we worked on the future land use map when we did an update to the town plan. So David already identified with us, with our input.
That's true.
And we talked about identifying areas near the high school. Chuck brought us the idea about Hamlet. We researched it. I don't remember if that was you or if that was you. And then it's mentioned in our town plan. So I actually think that we're probably really teed up, and that we already know so much, and we already have the expertise that we can rely on. It's not like we're starting from scratch.
But we still might
Then it can be.
want to be open to the idea of adjusting the zoning map.
Yes, but what I understand though is that the future, the way the category, the terminology matters because there'll be a correspondence between our existing zoning district, like low density residential, will map, for lack of a better word, will correspond to a category that they have at the state level that will be the same for everyone. So we don't necessarily have to change the name to qualify as that kind of a section of the transect. And the areas that matter the most are village center and village, which will be up to us how we describe. So we could decide our commercial district, according to the regional map, should be considered village, and therefore it would qualify for those kinds of programs and those kinds of exemptions without us having to change our map per se.
But we
Right,
want to change our map.
But we could change our map.
I'm
but-
just saying, can we be open to the idea that we would change our map?
Absolutely, yes, which is why when we were talking about it, I said one of the outcomes of that work might be a decision to change our zoning district map.
Okay.
I do know that the process of changing a zoning district map is more significant than changing zoning regulations.
No, I know that,
Okay,
because that's sort of, I've heard that many times.
Right.
Since I've been on the planning commission, and I understand that, but so far that has kept us from, I think it's kept us from really thinking, are these boundaries where they should be? Because our evolution as a town has changed dramatically, even in the 8 years I've been on the planning commission. And so I think we should, even though it might be more work, we should be open to the idea that the boundaries aren't quite what they should be,
Right.
based on where we are now.
right.
So maybe the key question is when and how are we gonna, is that off the table for year one this year and you're talking about it for 2026? Or is there a way of jump-starting some of it in 2025?
Right.
Because we know we want to go in that direction eventually.
Right, so I think we have to do some more research and talk with Darren about the logical order and what's involved.
Yeah, but I think part of the logical order is going through the future land use map update with VCRPC, seeing where these questions come up, where the inconsistencies are, or where we might want to change it. And then based on that, then we can sort of figure out how much, where, and how. So I think we should get through the future land use map exercise first, before starting tackling some of those questions.
It would be really helpful, as the two of you talk, to just start thinking about like how would, if it is the will of the planning commission and sort of what makes sense coming out of that, when and how does that map to what you have here for this year and what we might be thinking about for next year.
Right, so it'll become a project, and it'll either be pre-work in 25 and finish actual project in 26, or we'll see if we can actually do it in 25.
Yeah, and just also, I think, given what your knowledge of it is, like, are there ways of chunking out pieces to do instead of doing it all at once, so that maybe it becomes the thing that is not so big that it never gets done.
Right.
Right? Like, if there are ways for us to relate pieces of it to what you're doing, what we're already doing. I don't know enough, but I'm just conceptually.
Yeah, other things to keep in mind is like, that's not gonna be the only project we're gonna wanna work on. Some projects on this list we'll be able to do in-house. Some we might wanna apply for grants. What are the deadlines? When will the funding become available? That's all gonna factor into wherever we put it into a work plan.
100%. But thank you for reminding me of the town plan and the work that has already gone into those, I mean, those maps exist.
Right.
And yeah.
And CCRPC is using those maps. They have the Affordable Housing Committee's numbers for housing targets. So,
Oh, they do?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Yeah. I happily walk them through every single beautiful calculation.
Right, how we came up with those.
It wasn't pasta on the wall.
Yeah. Okay, so is there anything else from 2025 that you would suggest we consider also working on in 2025?
The only question that I have, again, it's a conceptual question because I don't have all the information, but I'm just thinking about our CCRPC presentation from the last time, where it was very clear there's a window of opportunity because of Act 118. And I'm hoping that as you plan out what we're doing now and next year, that we are teaming ourselves up as a community, not just as a planning commission, but as a community, to make sure that folks understand that opportunity that is available between now and the end of 2 or 3 years related to an easing of requirements, if I understood it correctly, around Act 250. Because it's really good to be very planful, but this is a really important strategic opportunity. And so, again, I don't know enough.
Like ARPA.
Right?
Yeah.
I know, right? But I think we're probably the group to make them sort of make it clear how and what might be done here. I don't see another committee having the capacity to do that. So I don't know if that's a special work group or it connects to one of your topics already.
Well, so he does have Assess Act 47 and 181 at the bottom there, but I do think that the wastewater public education project gives us an opportunity to communicate with residents and landowners like, hey, there's opportunity. There's a relaxation of regulations if you were thinking about converting your house to a quad or adding something in your backyard or selling a piece of property to a developer. They're no longer going to have these, 9-lot limits. That's an opportunity to get that kind of message out to people, because that's what you're thinking about, right? Like
that's what I'm thinking about.
grassroots. How do we get
and so Chris,
grassroots
it might relate to I love your thinking there, Susan. Like if we have capacity for the wastewater, like for public education and outreach to see if we can weave. I love that idea.
A bigger message. Yeah.
I love
Yeah,
that.
some things related to relief from certain Act 250 requirements is going to come directly from the future land use map
Great.
update,
Okay.
because that's going, the future land use map is going to, define our village centers in their village center using their definition of what a village center is, and it's likely going to align with ours. And those areas will automatically be part of what's called Tier B, and Tier B is an exemption from XYZ 250 requirements. So a lot of that stuff's just going to roll out as these things get adopted.
Brilliant. Love it. Okay.
But it's a good reminder that a lot of times our work is pretty dry and the public's not that interested, but we should be looking for opportunities to share this state and regional information with the public, because it might change what they're deciding to do with their little individual property.
Absolutely, and that can happen while we're doing the longer range work.
Right, and that's how you get infill, and that's how you get conversions.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Okay, anything else on the work plan, Chris?
Nope, not in, if
Okay.
anything else.
Public comment on the work plan, 3
Okay.
minutes.
Governance, I think, should be in the work plan and a constant ongoing thing. For example, you ask an individual a question about what is the way things should or should not be done. It's not an individual's job to answer that question. It's a function. We can also split and grab resources from other towns. We don't have to have 2 full-time people doing X, Y, and Z. We can cost share with Essex or Underhill and get expertise that we couldn't hire or buy even if we wanted to. So governance is not there. I think it's an ongoing activity. The issue that Chris was bringing up, that fast track, we should have a defined fast track. I'll use Kate's food truck sign. $90,000 got spent over 3 square foot of sign between the property owner and the interpretation of the regulation. The judge says it's really simple. Your regulation doesn't read well. So I'm going to go constitutionally interpret what the intention of the regulation was. Anybody that's read that type of stuff, I knew what the intention was. So boom. So the town spent 40 or 50 grand on legal fees and got $2,700 in fines, all types of ill will, and the appellant spent $40,000 or $50,000. You got to fix those things when they happen. They're simple, they're easy. You need a fast track process under your governance, and it's not there. Somebody says, gee, we can't do this because we can't have like a whole restaurant goes all the way through the process. $100,000 gets spent. Oh, we can't have it because it can't be 90 feet wide in that zone. Fast track problem. That was never the intention of the citizens of this community to say that a building in Jericho in that specific location can only be 90 feet wide. Bill Butler Wisdom House, they've been working on it for 5 years. You can't even build it. But you know what fast track is? When the town discovers that their zoning doesn't allow them to build the building that they've already spent 300 or 400 grand on, that's fast track. We, the citizens, I've been talking for years, completely ignored. So what do? People like me, we go to the Supreme Court, which I've done against the town of Jericho. That's not a productive process. So your points are, problem resolution. You don't have a swift problem resolution. Somebody runs into this interpretation issue, in your regulation should say, oh my God, this person says this, that person says that. Dollar General, look at what happened over Dollar General. The DRB approves it, and then the select board and other people say they don't like it, so you try to deny a permit that was already existing. So now we have a Dollar General. Synergistic and hybrid. We should be working swiftly on these things. Chris is new here, but there's other people that have been around. What I call intelligence, there's a word for it that just left my brain. And it's
institutional memory.
Institutional memory, thank you, William. Appreciate that. And then, and things like really simple things. Why, if I want to develop 5 houses on my property, do I have to go through a subdivision process? Give me one reason. I have 140 acres of contiguous land. I've got infrastructure, I've got power, I've got sewer permitted, all this other stuff. Why can't I just develop 5 single-family houses? And why do I have to build a fourplex when I could build a hamlet? These things are simple, they're easy to do, break them off in pieces. If you guys can't do them, designate under your modern governance method. Let's get 5 or 6 citizens to work on this. When there's a big feud between the fire department and the town, Chuck Lacey and 4 or 5 other people jump on it. 3 months later, 6 months later, whatever it is, there's a resolution, the rapport issue's solved, and we have fire safety. Governance This is not an efficient method of getting things done because we've made it so complicated to get really simple things done. And I hate to say it, I'm 77 years old this year. I don't have the patience to wait until 2027 to solve the housing problem in Jericho.
Okay, thank you.
And last
Any other-
comment, public needs, it's not there. We've got money, there's $400,000 of funds sitting at 2 Railroad Circle that the town bought as an asset that's now at a present value $500 grand. What are we gonna do with it and why is it not there? The Rivers' property, donated by Mary Alice Rivers 30 years ago, because she was scared somebody was gonna buy it for a gravel pit and she wanted to give it to the town. Why is that not there?
Okay, Jim, I have to ask you to stop there. Thank you. What about anybody online? Do you guys have any comments on the work plan?
Hello, I would like to
Okay,
make a short one.
yep,
I really hope you can resolve this building size thing for us. I mean, we've been at this, like Jim said, for 5 years. It's actually longer with Greg Tatro. But Mary Jane Dickerson was one of our first participants in working on this project, Wisdom House, and she's gone now. I feel like there's a little bit of urgency to this. People are looking for places to live. People are looking to get a healthier lifestyle for their age, and we need to build this. We need to build these everywhere, but you need to tell us that we can do it, or that we're wasting our time. And if, please just let us know. We've been at this for a long time, and I believe we just have to pick up and go to a neighboring town. Tell us if that's what we should do, and we'll start that process, because people are getting older and older, and they're dying. Arthur Schulman was one of our first members. He was going to run the restaurant. We've got to get going. And, there's a bit of urgency here. And Chris, I'd meet with you tomorrow morning if you still have the energy for it, because I do.
okay.
That's it.
Thank you, Bill. All right, so for next steps on the work plan, Chris and I will take this discussion into account. We'll update the work plan, probably review it again at our next meeting, extend it out to 2026. Plan to discuss it with the select board in the not too distant future, post it to the website, and use it as a map for our ongoing work this year and grant applications and things.
I also think that whenever possible, it would be great to have deadlines, self-imposed deadlines, even if they end up changing.
Mm-hmm.
And for those bigger, anytime there's a solid bar of the same color, at a certain point we could maybe break that down so that it's not just this vacuous.
Yep.
Well, each row maybe would have its own project plan.
Yeah.
I think that's a totally fair point, and some of these ones that are sort of undefined right now, like the future land use map update was once like that, right?
Mm-hmm.
But as we got more information on that, I was able to get it more specific. So some of these are, we just don't have the information right now to know exactly what it is, but that's a fair point.
Mm-hmm. So it's a living document. It'll change a lot. But think about for yourself, like everybody can't work on everything. So are there certain things that you'd really like to work on and apply your focus to? And thinking about other people that we can bring into the conversation and other towns and experts. I think that's a really good reminder.
I also think that the Riverside wastewater project, in my mind, that's headed up by the task force. It's not a planning commission project.
Right.
So I think that it's good to have it there because it's gotta be everywhere we can put it. But I don't think of that as a planning commission project. It would involve planning commission members,
Right, so it's sort of
but
like,
it should be driven by, I think it should be driven by the task force.
and I'm thinking we would probably be supporting the task force and providing information. So let's say somebody comes into the task force who doesn't really have exposure to the town plan. It would be our job to bring them up to speed. It would be our job maybe to help with communications. Okay, ready to move on?
Yep. All right.
All right, so then the next item is number 7, reports, and the first report is from Chris.
Great. Okay, Leahy Institute intern. First, a huge thank you to Wendy. She did an awesome job helping write the position description for what we're looking for. It is now posted on a website called Handshake, where students go to get internships. The deadline for applying is February 21st. I'm going to put together like a interview panel, so I asked Wendy if she wants to be on it, so when we get some applicants, we can interview them. At this point, I think we're looking for 2 interns with an emphasis on marketing and communications and land use planning. I think that'd be a good combination for what we're looking for. I can't remember who spoke about it before, but it was about stories and narratives, and that's really what we're hoping to get to change minds. Facts are important, but they're not always what's changing someone's mind. It's those stories and narratives. So pulling that information and figuring out what that is. I'm going to be working with someone at UVM on developing the education program for the interns to make sure that that'll just be a more detailed work plan to make sure that we're getting what we want out of it. So the intern will be working with us interns from mid-May to the end of August. Yeah. So that's for that. The future land use map update, I've already kind of talked about some of this already, but I've worked with CCRPC to develop our timeline between now and April to get this work done. It ends with the Planning Commission and Select Board reviewing and making some support or whatever it is that we want to do formally to support what the recommendations are. There is a working group created within the Planning Commission that will meet more frequently. That's Susan, SJ, and Sabina. Our first meeting is February 21st. We will be coming back to the Planning Commission with a preview of the updated future land use map that the CCRPC is going to release in early March. We're planning on presenting that same information to the Select Board at their February 20th meeting.
I think we're meeting on the 12th, right?
Our internal working group is the 12th.
You said the 21st.
Oh, I transposed the numbers, yes. Yeah, it's the 12th. I mentioned the housing targets. CCRPC is going to be releasing the housing targets. Then we will have a chance to talk to them about that. I mentioned I shared the housing committee numbers with them. So that's where we are with future land use map.
So wait, I wanted to just clarify one thing. So on February 20th, there'll be a presentation to the Select Board about some preliminary thoughts about the land use map?
Right, so let me go over those dates again. So on the February 12th, we have our working group meeting with CCRPC to go through what they've pulled together for Jericho. Then they're going to come back. They're going to present to the Planning Commission. They're going to give us a preview of that information, and they're going to go to the Select Board on the 20th with that same information before it is released to the wider public in early March.
So they're coming to the Planning Commission on the 18th?
Correct.
With the future land use map. And
the preview, yeah.
So who's giving the presentation to the Select Board on the 20th?
It will be CCRPC.
Okay. But we should probably try to be there, right?
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Okay.
this is also, we'll go over more in more detail with the working group. But this is just giving the planning commission a general idea of what's coming up later this month. So that's it for, any questions on either of these? Okay, I'll go to the next slide. All right, residential density, public hearing is scheduled for February 18th. I've talked to Paula, it is going to be on the select board's agenda for their March 6th meeting. So we're queuing that up to get to the select board.
So is that public hearing the same date as our meeting?
Say that again?
That is our meeting.
That is our meeting.
Oh, good.
February,
Okay, thank
yes,
you.
yes,
Okay.
yes.
Good, just double checking
Yeah.
and following. Okay. I had a moment of calendar overload.
So just two other things which are not on the slide, but I've been working with Paula to outline specifically what the next steps are for the select board related to wastewater, relying heavily on the recommendation memo from the planning commission to the select board. So they will be receiving the 100% feasibility study at their meeting this Thursday. And based on those recommendations from our letter to them, I've outlined for Paula, these are the steps that the select board needs to take on Thursday. So they have that information. Another thing, so, it's come up, I think, a couple times today, the importance of, or the opportunities to work with our adjacent towns on things that they're working on and pulling from their expertise. So I've started to reach out to each of the town planners just to meet them for lunch and see what they're working on. And my first meeting is this week with Larry Lewack. He is the new town planner for Underhill. He's been there for a couple weeks. So I'll be meeting with him, and he's the first of what I'm hoping is going to be a bunch of meetings.
That's great.
Yeah.
Chris, if I could interrupt, I ran into, it's small, this is one of those Vermont small worlds. While I was walking my dog, I ran into Susan Elliott, who was chatting to me, who said that she is now living in Shelburne, but was working through, I think it was a Leahy grant, to bring together in Chittenden County on a regular basis the town planners and who would be there both with the CCRPC, but also the economic development folks.
Oh.
So there would be a regular meeting. Sounds like you're not aware of that yet. I think it's just starting.
Yeah, so the CCRPC already schedules it's a planning advisory committee, monthly meetings.
Okay.
But that's for them. But it sounds like it sounds like what Susan is working on is something that will pull in the state's office as well.
Would it pull in are the economic development folks who are often not connected to the planners?
Oh, the private sector. Is that what you mean by economic development folks?
So each region has one, right? So ours is the Greater Burlington Investment Corporation.
Got it.
GBIC.
That's great. I have not heard from Susan on that.
All right,
yet.
I will follow up. I ran into her on Sunday and I just haven't had a chance to.
That sounds great.
I'll make sure that I'll tell her I delivered a very incoherent message to you that needs to be cleared up.
Message received.
Okay.
Yeah. Got it. Great. So that's all that I've got for updates, unless anyone has any questions for any of that. Great.
Okay, thank you, Chris. Now, we're going to hear a little bit about town meeting reimagined from SJ, right?
Yeah, I had one of those Aaron Sorkin West Wing proud of our little town moments. I'm just really proud of the work of the task force and the community at large to really, the decision last year to move to Australian ballot was made with the hopes of allowing every registered voter in Jericho the opportunity to vote on business of the town, whether they could attend a town meeting or not. that decision was made with the ask that we retain some of the magic, some of the community building, some of the direct access and direct democracy that is part of town meeting. And so the task force did try to thread the needle of doing both, making this more accessible to more people, while also making sure that the quality of that access, the access to select board members, the influence on the decisions that we all have enjoyed forever, that we maintain some of that. And so it turned out, as you all know, to be kind of in a three-step process. The second step was the step in January that most closely resembled town meeting day. And we had really great attendance for our very first town meeting Reimagined budget discussion. We had, what did we have? 75 people in the auditorium and 52 people on Zoom. The technology was a little glitchy in the beginning and then was pretty flawless throughout the meeting, so that people on Zoom were able to participate in the same fashion that the people in the room were able to participate. And honestly, it felt like town meeting. And we had 4 amendments. The select board went through the budget line by line like they always do. We had 4 amendments, 2 which passed by the voters, 2 failed. One of those amendments was to increase the select board stipend to $5,000 a year for each member. That passed, so that added $9.4 thousand to the budget. A more fruitful conversation around adding $30,000 to the budget to be spent specifically on traffic calming and speed control, passed by 1 vote. And at the end of all of that, so that added $30,000 more to the budget. At the end of all of that, the select board did something that I thought was really powerful and really important, which was the way that this meeting was set up was that it was a select board meeting. And so at the end of discussion, they closed the topic. They made a motion to approve the amendments that the town had voted on, and they unanimously approved the motion to change the budget. And so, in effect, that meeting resulted in the exact same kind of thing that a town meeting would have resulted in, where the citizens who participated had a direct influence on the budget. And so now that budget will go in the town report. A summary of that meeting will go in the town report as well. Anyone who wasn't at the meeting can either read that summary or watch the discussion, so that now every voter in Jericho has the opportunity to make an informed decision about voting up or down on the town's budget. That vote is, of course, on March 4th from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. at MMU, and if you want an absentee ballot, you need to request.
You can find the form online on the elections page.
SJ, how does 127 compare to a standard town meeting?
It's actually, it kind of depends on what the topic of conversation is that year, but it's not far off.
Higher or lower?
I've seen it range from 100 to, I haven't looked at the report, from 100 to 300, depending on. So I think, we would have felt really good about 150. The fact that we broke 130, I think, was important. It was a brand new night, so this was on a weeknight. And it was a meeting that no one really knew what to expect. I mean, we tried to advertise, but nobody really knew what to expect, and people still turned out. The other thing I'll say is that the first meeting we had in, when was it? October, 70 people came to that meeting. That was a kickoff meeting, that was a vision meeting, that was an opportunity to tell the select board what you wanted them to take into consideration as they built the budget. You know, a lot of those people were maybe the same people who attended, but maybe not. It was on a weekend. It was a different kind of meeting. And so 70 people attending that first meeting, 125, 130 attending this meeting, I think is really good for our first year. And I think that ultimately, I think that the decision of the select board to adhere to what they heard from the voters in that room, so that it really had the same effect as a typical town meeting, I think was important and is important moving forward for people to really buy into the new format.
But to really round out the comparison, we have to wait and see how many people actually vote on March 4th, because town meeting was whatever, 150, 200 people voted on the entire budget. And so if by going to Australian ballot, it's more than that, hopefully a lot more than that, then that to me would also like really put it in a different category of impact.
Yeah.
Like really expanding access.
An anecdote isn't data, but we certainly had a number of people say, I've never been able to attend town meeting before. I'm so excited I get to be here tonight. And one of the big concerns that a lot of people had about broadening the vote on the budget to the entire list of registered voters was that those voters wouldn't be as informed as folks who attended the meeting. And so it was really important to us that we include a reporting of what happened there in the town report, so that you can read that summary, you can see the amendments that didn't pass, you can see the amendments that did pass, and that also you can go back and watch the recording so that you can inform yourself. And you can inform yourself on your own time while you're folding laundry, which is how I do it.
Well, congratulations and thank you very much for all that work.
Really heavy lift. The task
preparation.
force did a huge amount of work, and we were, it was the first one, so that we can only go up from here. But But if you attended and you have, or even if you watch after the fact and you have feedback, please, there's a form online, or you can reach out to any of us and give us some feedback as we kind of plan for how to make next year even better. And
have you started to sift through any of the feedback yet? Do you have a sense for what?
We've got the meeting scheduled.
You do? For sifting through?
For sifting through the feedback.
Yep, okay. Okay, any other comments about town meeting reimagined and the
Spaghetti
budget
was
and
good.
the vote?
Spaghetti was good.
I did write to the select board and I thanked them on our behalf for including the $100,000 that we had recommended in the budget. And I also, I did listen to the meeting. I was on MMC TV, not on Zoom. So
interesting.
You didn't have a way to count those people.
Yeah.
So I don't know how many people there were, but
No, that's, Gammy knows that number.
Yeah, that's a good point.
It was like another 30 people, I think,
oh,
or
so
something.
that's pretty many.
Yeah, it was not 3, it was more.
I started
Yeah.
out
That's
on
over
that, and
150.
you couldn't see the screen share very well.
Right,
So then then you couldn't really participate, so then I switched to Zoom.
right, yeah. I was in the middle of doing other things, so it actually really worked that I could listen, but I didn't have to participate. But anyway, what was I
Would
saying
you
about
have
that?
been the one vote needed for the resolution to pass instead?
Well, no, it
It
did
did
pass.
pass,
It
right.
passed by one.
Yeah.
Would you have been the one who voted against it?
I don't think I should talk about my vote. However, I do think that, some of the feedback that I did give to the committee was that, making it really clear, like I said, well, if I had been able to persuade people to vote in favor of like a zip line over the beaver pond, I would hope that the select board would then go like, not gonna do that. Like, that they wouldn't just blindly, or not blindly isn't the right word. I wouldn't want them to I hope that they aren't backed into accepting. And also, given like the recent comments on Front Porch Forum, I think it's helpful to remind people that this is only one of many opportunities to give input to the select board. This happens to be professionally moderated, and it happens to be kind of later in the process when the budget is already drafted. But, if you have your issues, as we've seen, and you go to the select board, 3, 4, 5, 6 times, in my experience, they're generally, pretty responsive, and they try to respond. And so the sort of spin on Front Porch Forum is not as productive, and I think people need to learn that they can be more influential than they realize, I guess, by giving them other tools.
I think that that's a big priority of the task force. I think your first bit of feedback is for the select board and shouldn't be the task force telling the select board how they should handle things. But a really big priority for the task force was to get people involved sooner and understand all of the different points at which they can have a say. Part of that was the kickoff meeting, but then also the select board was really responsive in being more, I don't want to say more transparent because it suggests that they were hiding it before, but to make it easier to know what part of the budget they were going to be talking about and working on at each meeting, so that it was much more, so that if you had a specific interest like road salt, that you know where you can go or which meeting you want to pay attention to. And obviously there's a lot more work to go into that, and being consistent year to year, that we've got the visioning meeting and then these are the months where you take a look and see if when your topic is coming up for debate, and go to that meeting. And they've been really receptive. I was really appreciative that the select board was willing to change their process on such short notice, and make it so much more accessible.
So the numbers are 75 on the live stream, and then 26 people watched it after the fact.
75 not on the Zoom,
No,
just on
what you did.
MMC TV?
Yeah.
Oh, that's a lot more people.
Yeah.
Holy moly!
So
there you go.
By Gay's account, she came up with a number of 230.
That's,
Not including the select board members and Dave, who are all residents of the town.
that is amazing.
Mm-hmm. I think that's a good example where having multiple channels, so that you meet people where they are, after the fact, MMC TV, on the Zoom, I'm in person, you accomplished that. I mean, look at that, it's a big distribution.
Yeah.
I know how I got there. I did write to them and said, thank you for supporting the Planning Commission's recommendation, and I did appreciate in this letter how they answered the questions. So I thought that the memo that we submitted to them prepared them to answer the questions about why that money was in there.
It's ready.
I know, right?
The audience ready.
Right.
Yes. Yeah.
No. So that was really good. So I'm really happy how the Planning Commission was able to contribute. I think we made the process better. Okay, what other updates do we have from anybody on any other work?
I could give you a brief summary of the VLCT session I attended. So a few takeaways. First of all, they're a great resource, and they can, we could set up a meeting with an individual person from them who could be a point person for the duration.
What was the session?
Well, they call it a meeting with a project pro, but they, you sit down with them and you say, this is where we are, and this is what we've done, this is what we think we need to do next, and they say, okay, that's great, here's what you should be doing next. And
A private consult?
like a private consult about exactly where we are in our process, and how to move forward, especially with all the different funding.
Specific to wastewater.
Specific to wastewater, yeah. So I really think that's just a free resource that knows a lot more about the process than we do. So we should.
Because the session you attended was about funding wastewater for villages?
Correct.
Okay.
Municipal wastewater system, yes. So they said, they really repeatedly stressed the importance of a dedicated project manager, and hopefully CCRPC is going to fill that role. They said it was really important to understand the reason why you want wastewater, and to have that be sort of behind everything that you do, and everything that you put out to the public is the why. And so I think that's an important part of messaging as we go forward. And then the last point another point they made was to really know what your municipal capacity is, and to be ready to address it if it's not what you need it to be in terms of town staff. And I think will be an important one. Anyway, and then they have, there's a list of, 13 or 14 different funding sources to sort of sift through. So anyway, it was very useful. And I think they'll be a great resource.
Did they provide sort of like models of what is needed for staff capacity?
They didn't in particular, because I think it varies depending on the scale, the scope and scale, so they didn't. But I'm sure in an individual session, they would probably be able to.
Were there a lot of towns on the call? Was it Zoom or in person?
It was Zoom. There were from all over the state, yep. And people at all different stages of the work. And some of the questions were about, we have a system, we're trying to figure out how to, manage it, or what to do, how to figure out the maintenance, things like that. But yeah.
Okay, anybody else?
Heidi and I attended the Community Development Corporation meeting last Monday and just gave them a little breakdown synopsis of some of the highlights of things we learned at the Vermont Community Development Association meeting, which was also about funding in a more broad sense, not specific to wastewater. So they were pretty receptive to our presentation, and then I just sent them our notes, our combined notes with some additional links and things today. So they're kind of chewing on that and digesting it. So I don't know, did you want to say anything else?
No, I think, and we can certainly forward it to this committee as well. One of the things I was thinking about is if there's a point in time where we want to take a page from the excellent work that the two Chris's did in putting together the memo on, like, here's what we need for wastewater, like very concrete steps that we, and Susan, part of that? Sorry, Susan, that's okay. That table over there.
It could be anonymous.
There you go. That we might want to take the same approach, because it appeared to me that, like, they're very concrete thinkers, and needed more of a stepwise suggestion of the path forward. That was sort of my thinking, Sabina, after the kinds of questions we got, and just sort of the flatness, that it would behoove us, and that might be something we want to work on together. Again, recognizing this, whether it's for wastewater, Chris, or for anything else, like the participation of that group, and sort of recognizing the need, the intimate link between the planning and the economic development when we're looking at long-term financing is going to be really important. And there's a particular role that they can play. And I think that was really one of the big things that we took away from the conference we went to is this is a team sport. This is a team sport to create the kind of infrastructure that you're looking to do, to have the kind of growth that you want so that you can have affordable housing. You can increase the grand list, you can have a vibrant community. And so it is not government alone. And this is the connection that we need to be making. And they too talked about make sure your why is always the first thing, the why. And I think we've done a really good job with that with the town plan. So we have our why.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm thinking about looking forward to meeting with the select board and, what we want as an outcome of that discussion and what we would want to bring to the table in that discussion and how should the JCDC fit into that.
Yeah, it's. I wasn't able to stay for the rest of their meeting, and so I don't know what else they have going. But it is clear that they have not started some of the basic pieces that were recommended at the conference that we went to. So they're not connecting to GBIC yet.
So they're sort of a new, I don't want to use the word fledgling, but they're just sort of
they're
starting.
Still forming.
They don't really have a lot of momentum yet. And so you see an opportunity for us to potentially help.
I just think that there's that planning and economic development need to go together.
Mm-hmm.
Right, and so if there are ways for us to have those conversations and talk about public-private partnerships and how we jointly lay the foundation for future growth, I think it would be very helpful.
Mm-hmm. And there is a select board member on the.
There is, Eric is on it. Yeah, and it really is. It goes also to the ways in which government can do all that it can to set the table, but actually bringing the meal is the private sector, right? And so we need to be making sure that they're working a little closer.
Because I think the JCDC is sort of straddling, right, between public, we're
Exactly.
basically public sector, and they're kind of making that bridge.
That we're hopeful, yes.
That would be a really good role for them.
Yes.
Yep.
Yes.
Okay. Gave me a lot to think about there. I'm going to think about how best to maybe incorporate them into our work plan or our discussions with the select board.
And I can try and be a little bit more coherent. It was a long day.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you everybody for going to all those meetings. I think the more we learn and the more we trade shop notes, the better, more effective we're going to be. Do you have anything to add to that? Okay. So moving on then, does anybody have any other business? New topics to bring to the Planning Commission? Okay, so our next meeting is February 18th, and it looks like our agenda for that meeting is going to be our public hearing on the density amendments and CCRPC and the future land use map, some preliminary conversation, and a topic of the BMG. So that'll be a pretty big meeting. Do we want to start that meeting early?
With snacks?
Doing the hearing at 6:30? Do the hearing first?
There's been notice.
Has it gone out for the morning?
It's already went out, yeah.
Oh, so no.
So we could do the
Or
hearing
started
in the middle, start at 6:30, just take a
6:30.
break. Sounds like we got a lot to go.
That sounded like a lot to me. How do you guys sound
Sounded
about
like that
that?
to me.
6:30, and then we can figure out how to best use that first half hour.
That's a good idea.
I don't know if Darren thinks he needs more than a half hour. Maybe he could go first. Okay. All right.
Can I ask a question about Darren? Is Darren going to be looking for any feedback from us, or is that going to be you'll forward information from him, from feedback? Or?
Yeah, he will be previewing with the planning commission what they will be releasing.
The housing targets.
It's not the housing targets, it's the, I think he flashed it up on the screen at the last meeting. It's what CCRPC is releasing for the future land use map for public comment, and they're just giving us a preview. And it will be informed by the working group meeting we are having
Gotcha.
on the 12th.
Okay, thank
So
you.
the one meeting on the 12th is,
It's just a working group meeting.
Right, will we have more opportunities to work with them, do you think, than?
Yeah, so when we meet with
It'll
them on
be
the
iterative.
12th, they'll lay out in more detail
okay.
what the questions are. And what-
Sorry, the way you were phrasing it sounded like we're meeting on the 12th and then they're releasing the map on the 18th.
Sorry.
So,
No, let me,
Cool.
let me go again.
no, you're good.
So we have a working group meeting on the 12th where they're going to share their map and perhaps get some feedback from the people in the working group. Then they are going to share with the planning commission on the 18th and the select board on the 20th a preview of what is going to be released to the broader public in early March.
And then after the 20th, the working group continues to tweak it?
We'll continue to meet, and then the housing numbers will get folded in, and there's a series of things. And CCRPC this is their process, and they will lay it out more to the working group on the 12th, and then answer any questions you need.
Yeah, because they had like a public engagement, public outreach kind of activity that they're expecting. So I'm thinking that we're going to be helping them, or they're going to be helping us explain to Jericho residents that there's a new future land use map. It might affect our zoning district map, so pay attention, tell us what you think, kind of thing, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Does that get folded into our town plan?
That's a good question. So technically, I don't know how they're, that's a good, we'll ask them that on the 12th. Like, I did ask him in the presentation that he did, I was like, what's the regulatory teeth of this thing?
Yeah.
Like, I wasn't quite clear. I think I asked that, like, how does this impact our zoning district map? And I would imagine it's like supersedes what we would have in our town plan to some degree.
So like when we forwarded our town plan to CCRPC to weigh in, they looked at their policies in the future land use map to make sure that everything in their town plan was consistent, and if they had issues, they would raise it then. So it's.
But it couldn't supersede the town zoning map unless it's on record in the town for people to look at.
I know, I think it will supersede our
So
zoning
it will
district map
somehow be on record.
yeah, because it has to get approved by the state. That's why the corresponding terminology with our districts, to me, is sort of like the key activity.
But it would not supersede what we currently have. It wouldn't.
It's not gonna change our zoning,
Yeah,
but it would change what
Okay.
an Act 250 exemption. That's what, like, we don't say anything in our zoning about Act 250, because Act 250 is, and we live in an Act 250 world. And this map is primarily changing the Act 250 world that we already live in.
And it could inform future zoning changes.
Right.
Like it doesn't have to perfectly align
Right.
with our zoning map.
Okay.
Right, you're always gonna have,
It's the future.
Isn't it aspirational? Like,
Yeah.
Wasn't that how we always described our own future land use map? I mean, that's how David wrote about it in the town plan. But it's what we would like to see, what we hope for.
right, but, so that's what I thought
Specifically
Darren,
that it's not a zoning map, because he calls it out,
Yeah,
saying
he
it's
says-
not a zoning map.
Can I make a suggestion? That as part of the 12th and before the 18th, that somebody write down how the different plan maps relate to one another, what sort of authorities they have, what supersedes what, and how they influence one another.
I think that
I
would be
think having
really
like a
important.
sheet of that sort will help us not go in circles and will help our conversations elsewhere.
And if we're confused, then the public's gonna be
That's
confused.
right. So just,
So the three maps are the future land use map in our town plan, our zoning map, and the regional future land use
Yes.
map. Okay.
yeah, because I think it's easy to get lost as to which purpose they serve and how they relate to one another or not, and who's using them. So I can see a little matrix.
What I kind of got from what Darren explained is that, which was different than what David explained. So David explained our future land use map, yes, aspirational, you use it as you go through life, changing your zoning and changing your maps and changing your overlays and stuff like that. But what I thought Darren said is like, well, it's a future land use map because you're saying this is how we want land use to be in the future. Therefore, we need to update our policies, namely Act 250, but also zoning, so that from this point forward, any new land uses are in alignment with the future land use map, so that at some point the future land use map is the way the land use is currently, which was different than David's.
Yeah.
That was what I heard him say.
Yeah, so that'd be really helpful to have that clarity from the group. Because it will affect how we message, what's within our purview to make decisions, does it matter what comes first, like all those things.
Right,
That's kind of getting a little tangled up right now.
okay.
Thank you.
I'm so sorry. Can I just add, I don't know if it's something for the work plan, but this conversation reminded me that Darren said that if we want to apply for a neighborhood development designation, we should do so by October, that will then get grandfathered in, and anything moving forward, they will be applying on our behalf for, or will be determining the designations kind of for us. And so if we wanted one, if we had an idea for one that we wanted grandfathered in before these changes happen and maybe tie our hands or dictate, we needed to get that in before October. But that's all I wrote down. So I can't say any more than that.
So we are not going to be doing that.
Okay.
Yeah. It's a good bit of work to get that done for a program that's going away. And the same benefits that we would get from doing that, we are going to get by going through the future land use
But
map.
would it identify an area that perhaps the CCRPC wouldn't be identifying? Like, is there I'm thinking about the commercial district, but is there, yeah, I don't need to say it again. That's my question. That doesn't need an answer now, but.
Yeah, my understanding is that the end result is going to be the same.
But the time.
I want to be sure that we want the end result. That is definite.
So maybe when we ask about the three maps, we'll just clarify
Yeah.
that.
That would be really helpful.
His comment about that. Okay,
Can I make a motion to adjourn?
I was just gonna say, I think it's time for a motion to adjourn.
I need a motion to adjourn.
Heidi, thank you. I'll second it. Great. Okay, so Susan seconded. All those in favor of adjourn? You guys are so thoughtful. Thank you so much. All those in favor? Aye.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. You're welcome.